embarrassed in court as a homeless black mom with twins. The next day, she inherited $200 million in court. She was not seen as a mother, only as a failure. The homeless black woman, holding her twins, judged for her poverty while strangers whispered. Her cheeks burned with shame. Her heart broke with helplessness. No one knew the same woman, humiliated today, would wake tomorrow to an inheritance of $200 million. Before we dive into this powerful story, tell me in the comments what city or country you're watching from. And if you love inspiring stories like this, don't forget to hit subscribe, tap the like button, and share this video with someone who needs hope today. Amara Johnson stood in the middle of a small, crowded courtroom, the kind of place that felt built for bad news. The air was thick and heavy with a miserable heat, the kind that made your clothes stick to your skin and your head feel a little fuzzy. The old fans on the high ceiling just stirred the air around, pushing the heat from one side of the room to the other. She felt tiny, swallowed up by clothes that were too big and too old. A faded blue shirt and pants with an unevenly stitched patch on the knee. Her hair, a tangled mass of brown curls, was pulled back in a ponytail that kept coming undone. You could see the lines of worry etched around her eyes and the tired slump of her shoulders. She looked like she carried the weight of the world on her back. And in that moment, she did. In the back row, huddled together on a hard bench, were her twin children, Leo and Mia. They were 10 years old, a boy and a girl, with their mother's deep brown eyes and long, skinny arms. They were clutching hands, their knuckles white, and their heads were bowed low, trying to disappear. They could hear the whispers, the little snide comments from the people around them. Look at them, poor things. The words stung, but not as much as the look on their mother's face. The judge sat on his high chair, his face hidden behind thick glasses, looking down at everyone like they were all just numbers on a page. He flipped through papers, the sound of the pages turning the only thing breaking the silence. Amara felt like she was a bug under a magnifying glass. Everyone watching her, judging her. The court was about to decide if she was a good mother, and all she had to show for herself were a pair of worn-out shoes and a whole lot of love. Across the room, sitting at a big table, was her ex-husband, Derek. He looked like a different person. He was wearing a fancy dark suit that fit him just right. A crisp white shirt, a silk tie, expensive shoes that shined under the courtroom lights. He had a smug smile on his face, like he knew how this was all going to end. Next to him, his new wife, Cheryl, a woman with perfect blonde hair and a diamond ring that caught the light with every move, was whispering in his ear, and they both laughed. The sound of their laughter was like a sharp needle, pricking at Amara's heart. Derek's lawyer, a man in an even fancier suit, with slicked-back gray hair, stood up to speak. His voice was loud, booming through the quiet room. He started talking about Amara, but he wasn't talking about the woman who read bedtime stories to her kids every night or the woman who worked 2 cleaning jobs just to put food on the table. He was talking about a list of problems. He said things like, Mrs. Johnson has no permanent residence, and she has no stable income. And then he got to the real stuff, the painful stuff. He leaned into the microphone, his voice dripping with condescension, and said, "This woman can't even feed herself. How can she feed 2 children?" The words hit Amara like a punch to the gut. She felt a gasp escape her lips, but she held it in. She saw the judge look up, his eyebrows raised. A murmur went through the room. Amara's eyes, which had been so tired just a moment ago, now burned. Tears welled up, but she forced them back. She wouldn't cry. Not here. Not in front of her kids. She straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and looked straight at the lawyer. She might be poor, she might be tired, but she was a mother. She was strong. In the back, Leo and Mia saw their mother's face. The way she didn't flinch, the way she held her head high. They felt the shame of being poor, the sting of the whispers, but they also felt a surge of pride. Their mom was a fighter. They tightened their grip on each other's hands, a silent promise to be strong for her, too. The lawyer kept going, painting a picture of a life that was nothing but a mess. He talked about how Derek was a good man, a hardworking man, and how he could give the children a stable life. He talked about a big house, good schools, new clothes. things Amara could only dream of. After what felt like an eternity, the judge finally put down his papers. He cleared his throat and looked at Amara. His voice was monotone, just as indifferent as his expression. Given the circumstances presented to this court regarding financial instability and lack of a permanent address, I am forced to make a temporary ruling. Amara's heart hammered against her ribs. She didn't want to hear what was coming. It felt like the world was spinning away from her. The judge continued, temporary custody of the children, Leo and Mia, will be granted to the father. The mother will have limited visitation rights, with a review scheduled in 6 months. The words fell on Amara like a ton of bricks. The room filled with whispers, louder now. People were talking, shaking their heads. Amara felt dizzy. She had lost. She looked at her children in the back, their faces pale with shock. She couldn't stay another second. She turned and walked, almost ran, to the back of the room. She scooped up a child in each arm and hurried them out of the courtroom, the sounds of her defeat echoing behind her. Once outside, the fresh air didn't help. She felt her chest tighten, a lump forming in her throat. She held her twins tightly, a silent sob shaking her body. She had to be strong for them, but her heart was breaking. And just as they stepped out onto the busy street, Amara thought about the long road ahead, the next 6 months that felt like a lifetime. She didn't know how she was going to fight this. She didn't know how she was going to get her kids back. She just knew she had to. Hey, if you're enjoying this story so far, be sure to hit that like button. It really helps me know what kind of stories you love to see more of. And don't forget to share this with a friend who loves a good story. Amara held Mia's hand in her right and Leo's hand in her left, walking down the sidewalk as the afternoon sun beat down. The heat was a different kind of monster here on the street, not trapped and stuffy like the courtroom, but hot and dusty. Her old sneakers felt thin on the hard pavement, and she could feel every tiny rock. The twins were quiet, their little hands clammy in hers. They hadn't said much since they left the courtroom, and Amara knew they were just as heartbroken as she was. Their stomachs rumbled with hunger, a low, empty sound that she felt in her own gut. They walked for a long time, past bright shops and people hurrying by, none of them even looking at the little family on the sidewalk. Amara felt invisible. She saw their reflection in a big glass window of a store. 3 tired faces, 3 pairs of brown eyes with a sad, lost look in them. She saw her own face, thinner now, the dark circles under her eyes even darker. The Amara in the glass looked like a stranger to her. Suddenly, a sweet smell hit her. It was the smell of roasted chicken and warm bread, rich and inviting. The twins' heads lifted, their noses twitching. They stopped in front of a fancy restaurant with big, shiny doors and windows. Inside, tables were covered with white cloths, and people were laughing, their plates piled high with delicious food. As they stood there, a memory came flooding back to Amara, so vivid it felt like she was standing there right now. Not a single memory, but a collage of beautiful days. She was wearing a long, flowy dress, a bright red that made her skin glow. Her hair was done up in a pretty style, and she had a light touch of makeup on, making her eyes look big and bright. It was her birthday. Derek, her husband at the time, was sitting across from her at a restaurant just like this one, his eyes full of love and admiration. He was a different man back then, kind, gentle, and always wanting to make her happy. He was wearing a simple shirt, but he looked handsome and proud. He reached across the table and held her hand, his thumb stroking her knuckles. "To my beautiful wife," he had said, "and to our bright future. I love you, Amara." Her heart had felt so full it could burst. They had talked about everything that night, about their dreams for their kids, about a house with a big yard, about traveling the world. She had felt so safe, so loved. Amara blinked, and the memory faded. She was back on the hot sidewalk, the smell of food making her stomach ache. The twins were still staring into the window, their faces pressed against the glass. The stark difference between then and now was a punch in the chest. Another memory. It was Christmas. Snow was falling softly outside their apartment window. The Christmas tree was lit up with colorful lights, and the little living room was filled with the smell of gingerbread cookies. Leo and Mia were toddlers, their faces smeared with flour and frosting as they decorated the cookies. Derek was on the floor, tickling them, his laughter filling the small room. Amara had been holding a camera, taking pictures of the moment, thinking about how lucky she was. She had so much love, so much happiness. She felt rich not with money, but with a full heart. The memory dissolved, and the cold reality of the street took its place. Amara shivered, even though it was hot. She looked down at the twins. They were thin now, their little bones sticking out. The clothes they were wearing were hand-me-downs from a shelter, faded and worn. Amara swallowed hard, the lump in her throat so big it hurt. Leo's small voice broke the silence. "Mommy, when will we eat like that again?" Amara's heart shattered into a million tiny pieces. She looked at her son's innocent face, then at Mia, whose eyes were still fixed on the restaurant's windows. She forced a smile onto her tired face, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Soon," she whispered, her voice a little shaky. "I promise. Soon." But inside, a cold, hard doubt settled in her stomach. How soon? She wondered. When? She had no job, no home, no money. She felt so lost, so hopeless. Her promise felt like a lie, a cruel trick she was playing on her own children. She pulled them away from the window, and they started walking again. The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, but the beauty of it was lost on Amara. She was just looking for a place to go. They passed a fancy building with big glass doors and polished signs. As she hurried past, her eyes briefly caught a sign on the side of the building. It said something about law offices, and under that, in smaller letters, it said inheritance and estate disputes. Amara didn't stop to read it fully. It was just another sign on a street full of signs, and her mind was on her children's empty stomachs. She didn't know it then, but the sign had planted a tiny, invisible seed for something that would happen later. As night fell, the streets got darker and a little bit colder. The city felt different at night, less friendly. She led the twins towards the one place she knew they could be safe for the night. It was a homeless shelter, a big brick building with a long line of people waiting to get in. Amara took her place at the end of the line, feeling the shame burn her cheeks, but she pushed it down. Her kids came first. They waited for a long time and finally they were inside. The place was crowded and smelled of old floor cleaner and too many people. A kind-faced woman with a name tag that read Sarah gave them thin blankets and pointed them toward 3 hard, metal bunk beds. Amara made sure the twins were settled in the bottom bunk, covering them with the thin blanket and kissing their foreheads. "Good night, my loves," she whispered. She climbed into the top bunk, the metal frame groaning under her weight. She lay there, staring up at the dark ceiling. The voices of other people in the shelter faded, and the silence of the night settled in. It was a heavy, lonely silence. Tears, hot and silent, slid down her cheeks and soaked into the thin pillow. She didn't make a sound. She didn't want the twins to hear her crying. She closed her eyes and whispered a prayer into the dark, a desperate, silent plea for a miracle, for some way to get her children back, for some way to give them the life they deserved, for a way to make her promise to them come true. The morning after their first night at the shelter, Amara and the twins woke up early. The air was cool but stale, a different kind of quiet than what they were used to. They had a quick, watery oatmeal breakfast in a big, noisy dining hall. The twins didn't complain, but Amara could see the exhaustion in their little faces. She told them they were going to walk around and see if they could find some work, maybe cleaning or helping out somewhere. It wasn't about finding a real job, just about making it through the day. The city market was loud and smelled of fresh bread and spices. Amara walked slowly, her eyes scanning the different stalls, when she heard a voice call her name. "Amara? Is that you?" She turned and saw a woman standing by a fruit stand. It was Nia, a friend from her old life, a woman she used to meet for coffee and chat with about their kids. Nia was dressed in nice jeans and a simple, stylish shirt. Her face, which usually held a warm smile, looked a little hesitant now, a little sad. Amara's heart did a strange little jump. She hadn't seen anyone from her old life in a long time. She felt a wave of shame wash over her. She knew she looked a mess, and she could see the pity in Nia's eyes as she took in Amara's worn-out clothes and the tired faces of her children. "Nia," Amara said, her voice a little choked up, "it's good to see you." Nia hugged her tightly, a little awkwardly. Amara could feel the warmth and comfort of a real hug for the first time in a long time, and she almost started to cry right there in the middle of the market. But she held it in. Nia pulled back, her eyes full of questions. "Amara, what happened? I tried calling you. No one knew where you went. We all thought you just disappeared." Amara didn't know how to explain it all. The court, the shelter, the long, lonely months. She just shook her head. "It's a long story," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Nia's face hardened with a different emotion. Not pity, but a quiet anger. She looked over at the twins, who were standing close to their mother, holding on to her jeans. "Amara," Nia said, her voice low, "I know what happened. Or, at least, I know what he told everyone." She took a deep breath. "He told everyone you left, that you took off and left him and the kids. He said he had to file for custody because you abandoned them." Amara's blood ran cold. "What? That's not true." Nia leaned in closer, speaking in a low, conspiratorial voice. "I know it's not, but he was so convincing. He had this whole story about how you were unhappy, and that you left all the money behind." Nia hesitated for a moment, then went on. "But he's a liar, Amara. I saw some things. My husband and Derek still talk sometimes. I know he hired some fancy lawyer to make sure you couldn't get to the joint savings. He changed the locks on the house the day you left. He put the house in his new wife's name before you could even think to fight for it. He set you up, Amara. He planned all of this." As Nia spoke, Amara's body went rigid. The shame she had felt just a moment ago was now replaced with a slow, simmering rage. The pieces of the puzzle that hadn't made sense suddenly snapped into place. The day she had been locked out, the day the bank told her the account was empty, the way his lawyer had talked in court. It was all a part of a cruel, deliberate plan. He hadn't just won, he had cheated. He had pushed her into this. He had planned to make her homeless. Nia's voice dropped to a near whisper. "And now he's living large, Amara. He bought Cheryl, his new wife, this huge diamond ring. He talks about all the renovations they're doing to your house. The one you picked out. The one you decorated. He's showing off, living a life of luxury while you—" Nia's voice trailed off, her eyes filling with tears. "While you're out here." Amara couldn't speak. The words seemed to stick in her throat. She just stood there, her hands clenched into fists, the little bit of hope she had left dissolving into a dark cloud of anger and betrayal. She saw a flicker of the life she once had. The nice house, the full bank account, the love. All a lie, all a cruel trick pulled by the man she once trusted. The man she had given her heart to. She thanked Nia, her voice distant, and pulled the twins along. They walked in a daze, past the noisy market, past the smiling faces. Her head was spinning. Her heart was a whirlwind of hurt and anger. They found a quiet little park, and Amara sat down on a bench under a big, shady tree. The twins sat on either side of her, leaning against her. Finally, the dam broke. The tears she had held back for months, the tears she wouldn't let anyone see, came pouring out. She put her face in her hands and sobbed, a deep, racking kind of cry that came from the very depths of her soul. She felt so defeated, so worthless. She had lost her kids, her home, her husband. And it wasn't because she was a bad mother. It was because she had been tricked, betrayed by the person who was supposed to protect her. She felt like a complete and total failure. She felt two small hands on her arms. Leo and Mia were looking at her, their own eyes big and full of tears. Mia reached up and gently wiped a tear from her mother's cheek. "Mommy, don't cry," she whispered, her voice so small and gentle. "We still love you." "We do," Leo added, his little hand patting her arm. "You're the best, Mommy." Their words were a balm to her broken heart. Amara pulled them into a tight hug, her arms wrapped around them like she could shield them from all the bad things in the world. They were all she had. They were her everything. As she held them, her hands brushed against a thin chain around her neck. It was a simple silver necklace Derek had given her on their first anniversary. It was the only thing she had left from her marriage, a sentimental object she had held on to as a reminder of a time when she was loved. As she touched it, a cold snap ran through her. The tiny clasp had broken. The necklace fell apart in her hands, the little pieces of silver scattering on the ground. It felt like a sign, the last physical reminder of her marriage crumbling, just as her life had. But something shifted in her. As she looked at the broken pieces, a new feeling took over. The anger from earlier came back, but this time, it was a cold, steady fire. The feeling of being defeated was gone, replaced by a fierce determination. He had taken everything from her. Her home, her money, her dignity. But he hadn't broken her spirit. He hadn't broken her bond with her kids. She looked at Leo and Mia, their faces still filled with a love that was pure and unwavering. She looked up at the sky, her jaw set. A promise formed on her lips, a vow whispered so quietly that only she could hear it. But she meant every word. If I have to fight with nothing, I will. He hasn't seen the last of me. Life at the shelter was a constant, grinding struggle. The days all blurred together, marked only by the routines of a place with too many people and not enough hope. Each morning, they would line up for breakfast, a thin gruel or watery oatmeal that barely filled their stomachs. Amara would always find a way to make sure Leo and Mia got a little extra, pushing her own bowl to the side and pretending she wasn't hungry. The twins knew, of course, but they were too young and too hungry to say no. Their little hands would reach out for the extra spoonfuls, and Amara's heart would ache with a mix of love and sorrow. The simple shame of it all was the hardest part. Going out into the world, walking past people who had clean, nice clothes and full bellies. Amara felt like she had a sign on her forehead that read, failure. The clothes they wore were worn out, with holes in the knees and frayed cuffs. They were hand-me-downs from a donation box. One day, at a small park near the shelter, some kids pointed at Mia's shoes, which were two different colors. Look at her, one boy sneered. She can't even afford matching shoes. Mia's face crumpled, and she looked down at her feet, her little shoulders slumping. Amara's blood boiled with a protective rage, but she knew better than to make a scene. She simply took her twins by the hand and walked away, her head held high, but her insides twisted with a humiliation so deep it felt physical. The nights were the hardest. The shelter was loud. There was a constant hum of talking, of TVs playing, of people snoring or crying in their sleep. Amara would lie awake on her thin mattress on the top bunk, listening to the sounds of other people's despair. She couldn't sleep. Her mind raced with thoughts of what she had lost, what she had to do to get it back, and the constant worry of her children's safety and well-being. The hard bunk bed was a constant reminder of how far she had fallen. She missed the soft mattress of her bed, the quiet of her own home. But most of all, she missed the feeling of being safe. Here, even when the lights were out, she was on guard, always listening, always worried. One evening, Amara was walking to the bathroom, her feet making a soft, whispery sound on the old floor. As she passed a small, dimly lit seating area, she overheard two women talking in low, gossipy whispers. They were huddled together, and one of them looked up as Amara passed. Amara kept her head down, her heart pounding. See that one? A voice said, clear as day. She used to be married to that rich man, the one who owns all those buildings. Really? The other woman answered. I heard he was really something. What happened? Who knows? The first voice replied with a dismissive sigh. Some women bring shame on themselves. You can't tell me he just left for no reason. Probably did something to make him kick her out. Now look at her. Amara didn't stop. She just kept walking, her face burning with a silent shame. The words were like sharp daggers, cutting deep. They didn't know the truth. They didn't know the pain. They didn't know the careful, cruel planning of her ex-husband. But in that moment, their judgment was all that mattered. The truth was something she carried alone. She felt the weight of it, the constant burden of having to be strong when she felt so incredibly weak. The walk back to the shelter that night was awful. A storm had rolled in, a sudden torrent of rain that seemed to come out of nowhere. Amara and the twins were soaked within seconds. The wind howled, and the rain came down in sheets, plastering their thin clothes to their bodies. They huddled together under a small awning, shivering, but the water seemed to find them no matter where they stood. Amara felt the storm on the outside mirroring the storm inside of her. Her hope was a fragile thing, and the rain felt like it was trying to wash it all away. Every drop was a reminder of her despair. When the rain finally slowed to a drizzle, they continued their walk back to the shelter. Amara's teeth were chattering, and she could feel the cold in her bones. She just wanted to be somewhere dry, somewhere they could be warm for a few hours. They were about a block away from the shelter when they passed a small market. A tiny, stooped woman with a warm, kind face was standing outside, her head covered with a scarf, a basket of fresh bread and fruit at her feet. She looked up as Amara and the twins walked by, and her eyes, though wrinkled with age, were full of a gentle wisdom. "Child," the woman said, her voice soft but clear, "you look like you could use some help." Amara, too proud and too tired to answer, just shook her head and tried to walk past. But the woman reached out and gently took her arm. "Please," the woman insisted, her voice full of an ancient kindness. "Take this, for you and your little ones." She held out a warm loaf of bread and a couple of ripe apples. Amara's eyes filled with tears. No one had been so kind to her in a very long time. The smell of the warm bread was almost too much to bear. She hesitated, but the woman just smiled gently and pushed the food into her hands. "Don't lose hope, child," the woman said, looking straight into Amara's eyes. "The story can turn overnight. You just need to hold on." The woman's words were a tiny candle in the darkness, a simple but powerful truth. Amara looked at the bread in her hands and then at the woman's kind face. A flicker of hope, something she thought was gone forever, sparked in her chest. She had nothing, but this stranger had seen her and had not judged her. Maybe, just maybe, the woman was right. Maybe the story wasn't over yet. She didn't know it at the time, but the woman's words were not just a comfort, but a sign of things to come. The next day, Amara knew she needed a place to go with the twins. The thought of walking the cold streets again made her heart ache. She had to find somewhere warm, somewhere safe, where they could just be kids for a little while. The city library seemed like the perfect spot. It was quiet, warm, and full of books that could take them far away from their reality, even if just for an hour or two. They found a corner in the children's section, where the carpets were a little softer and the books had bright, happy pictures on their covers. Amara got some paper and crayons for Leo and Mia, and they immediately started drawing, their little faces serious with concentration. Amara watched them for a moment, a small, sad smile on her lips. They were so good, so strong. They deserved a better life. While the twins were busy, Amara walked over to a table with old newspapers and magazines. She wasn't really looking for anything, just trying to pass the time. Her eyes scanned the headlines, a sea of words that felt so far removed from her own life. She picked up a folded newspaper, an old one from a few years back, and was about to put it down when she saw a name in a headline. It was a name she hadn't thought about in a long, long time. The headline was about a fancy charity event, and it mentioned the name Maxwell Johnson. Amara's heart gave a little jolt. Johnson was her family name, her grandmother's last name. She read the article more closely, her brow furrowed in concentration. The article talked about the Johnson family of real estate and shipping, a very wealthy old family. Suddenly, a memory, faint and hazy like an old photograph, floated up from the back of her mind. It was a memory of her grandmother, a sweet, proud woman with laugh lines around her eyes. Amara must have been a little girl, maybe 7 or 8. She was sitting on her grandmother's lap, and her grandmother was telling her a story. "Amara, my sweet girl," her grandmother had said, her voice a soft, gentle hum. "We come from a good family, a family with land and riches. Don't you ever forget it. We have strong roots, and one day you'll see. There are good things waiting for us." Amara had always thought it was just a story, a bedtime tale meant to make a little girl feel special. Her grandmother had passed away a few years later, and the family had never talked about land and riches again. They had always been a simple family, making an honest living. So, she had always just dismissed the words as a loving grandmother's fairy tale. But seeing that name in the newspaper, attached to a powerful, wealthy family, sent a shiver down her spine. Could her grandmother's words have been true? Amara felt a wave of doubt crash over her. This is crazy, a voice in her head whispered. It's just a coincidence. Johnson is a common name. She felt a bit foolish, a homeless woman in a library, dreaming of an inheritance. Even if it's true, what chance do I have against powerful families? They'll just laugh at me. She knew she couldn't fight a wealthy, established family, not with her lack of resources, not with her worn-out clothes and her 2 children. The idea was just too big, too impossible. But the thought, once planted, refused to leave her mind. It was a tiny, persistent little spark of hope. Leo and Mia finished their drawings and came over to her. "Mommy, what are you looking at?" Mia asked, her little voice full of curiosity. Amara looked down at the old, yellowed paper in her hands. The headline about the Johnson family seemed to almost glow under the library lights. She looked at her children's innocent faces, and the doubt in her heart began to fade, replaced by that fierce determination she had felt the day before. She knelt down to their level, her voice soft but serious. "I was just looking at this," she said, tapping the newspaper. "It's about a family with our last name, and it got me thinking. Maybe our family had more than we ever knew." Leo's eyes grew wide. Like a lot of money?" he asked, his voice filled with a child's wonder. "Maybe," Amara said with a small smile. Mia giggled and clapped her hands. "A mansion. Can we have a mansion? With a big yard for a puppy?" Amara's heart swelled. Just the thought of it, of giving them a home with a yard and a puppy, was enough to push her to do something. She put the newspaper in her bag, a little crumpled but safe. It wasn't just a newspaper anymore. It was a clue, a secret, a glimmer of a possibility. As they were leaving the library, the twins walking ahead of her, their little heads filled with dreams of mansions and puppies, Amara felt a gentle tap on her shoulder. She turned and saw a familiar face, a warm, kind face she hadn't expected to see again. It was the same elderly woman from the day before, the one who had given her the bread and the advice. Amara's eyes widened in surprise. "You're here," Amara said, her voice a little shaky. "I thank you again for your kindness. It meant the world to me." The woman smiled gently. "I am here for a reason, child." She looked at Amara, and her eyes held a serious look. "Your name, it's familiar. I knew a Johnson family once. A very wealthy one." The words hung in the air like a heavy curtain, separating Amara's past life from a possible future she couldn't yet imagine. The coincidence was too much. The words of the stranger, the newspaper article, the fading memories of her grandmother. It all came together to form a clear and powerful message. Her story wasn't over. Her fight was just beginning. The small, laminated business card felt heavy in Amara's hand. A tiny rectangle of paper with the name Mr. Davies and an address printed on it. It was the lawyer's office she had passed so many times. It had a different name on the sign now, but the building was the same. The spark of hope the elderly woman had given her was a flicker of fire now, and it had a name and an address. Amara knew she had to go, had to find out if there was any truth to the old newspaper article and her grandmother's stories. She had to borrow a few dollars from a kind woman at the shelter to take the bus downtown. The twins, of course, couldn't come with her. It was a place for serious grown-up things, she told them, and she needed them to be safe at the library with a friend she had met, a kind woman who worked there and offered to watch them for a little while. They had kissed her goodbye, a little nervous but also excited for their mom. Amara felt a surge of love and fear, a wild mixture of emotions. This was it. This was the moment that would either lead them to a new life or break her heart completely. The lawyer's office was in a tall, modern-looking building. The waiting room was quiet and smelled of leather and expensive floor cleaner. A young woman with a polite smile told her to have a seat. Amara felt so out of place, so small in her worn-out clothes. She looked down at her hands, her nails were chipped, and she had a small tear in the seam of her sleeve. She wanted to turn around and run, But she thought of Leo and Mia and their dreaming faces, and she stayed put. After what felt like an eternity, a man with a tired face and kind eyes walked into the waiting room. He introduced himself as Mr. Davies and led her back to a small, cluttered office. The room was stacked high with old folders and books, and papers were piled on every surface. It felt more like a real place, a place of hard work, not just a fancy front. Amara sat on the edge of a chair and, with a shaky voice, told him her story. She didn't say everything, of course. She just mentioned the old newspaper article she had found, and her faint memories of her grandmother's stories about a wealthy family with her same last name. She watched his face for a sign, for a look of pity or dismissal, but his expression stayed neutral. He just listened, nodding thoughtfully. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair and looked at her for a long moment. "Johnson," he said, more to himself than to her. A familiar name. He got up and walked over to a big metal filing cabinet in the corner. He started pulling out old files, his fingers moving quickly, flipping through papers. Amara sat in silence, her heart thumping in her chest. He searched for a long time, the only sounds being the rustle of papers and the low hum of the air conditioner. Amara felt her hope shrinking with every passing minute. He was going to find nothing. He was going to tell her it was a common name and that she had to go. But just as she was about to stand up, he stopped. He pulled a thick, heavy file from the cabinet. The folder was old and yellowed at the edges. He carried it back to his desk and sat down. His eyes, which had been tired, now looked at her with a mix of surprise and a serious kind of caution. He stared at her, then down at the file, then back at her. Amara felt her breath catch in her throat. "Mrs. Johnson," he said slowly, his voice low, "it seems there are some documents here. Old ones. A will. It belongs to a Mr. Reginald Johnson." Amara felt a wave of dizziness. She had never heard that name before. I don't know that name." "You might not," the lawyer said. "But he was your grandmother's brother. He died a long time ago. He was a very powerful, very wealthy man, with no children of his own. The will was never executed because your grandmother's whereabouts were never fully confirmed. No one knew where she had gone after she left the family." Amara was so shocked she could barely speak. Her head was spinning. She remembered her grandmother leaving the family a long time ago, but she didn't know the story. She had never known the reason. She just knew they had been a different kind of family back then. A simple family who didn't want anything to do with the wealthy side. But now it was all coming back. The lawyer looked at her, his expression now serious and a little grim. "The will is here. It's here, and it leaves a significant amount of money to any remaining kin of your grandmother. Which, it seems, is you." He leaned forward, his voice dropping. He wasn't a cold, corporate lawyer like Derek's. He was a man who looked like he had seen a thing or two. "But I have to warn you, Mrs. Johnson, if this is true, others will fight you for it. This isn't just about a few $1,000s. This is about millions. Families don't give up millions without blood." Amara's heart hammered in her chest. A wild, chaotic beat. The words he was saying felt unreal, like something from a movie. Millions? Could this really be happening? Could this be the miracle she had prayed for? Her way out of the shelter, out of the shame, out of the life that was slowly suffocating her and her children? But his words also filled her with a new, cold kind of fear. Others will fight you for it. The idea of more fighting, more legal battles, more people trying to tear her down. It was terrifying. She had barely survived the first one. What would happen when the stakes were this high? Could this be a trap? Another way for someone to take advantage of her? She felt a surge of hope and fear at the same time, two powerful emotions pulling her in opposite directions. She left the office in a daze, the details of the conversation still swirling in her head. She went to the library, where the twins ran to her with bright smiles. That night, back at the shelter, with the sounds of the other people filling the air, she hugged them tighter than she ever had before. She held them close, kissing their foreheads, their hair. "Our story might be changing, my loves," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. They didn't fully understand, but they felt her love, her hope. They saw the tiny, powerful spark that was now burning in her eyes. It was a different kind of light than they were used to seeing in her face. Not the exhaustion, but a fierce and quiet promise. "Everything's going to be okay, Mommy," Mia whispered, and Amara knew she was right. The lawyer had promised to dig deeper, to verify the information, and to call her back. Amara gave him the number to the shelter's front desk, her one link to the outside world. As she walked away from his office building and back to the bus stop, she felt a little more confident, a little less lost. She felt like she had a secret, a chance. But she didn't see the dark-colored car parked across the street. She didn't see the figure sitting in the back, the face hidden behind a newspaper. As she got on the bus, the figure slowly lowered the newspaper, a pair of cold, hard eyes watching her go. A phone was lifted, a quick call made. "She knows," a voice said simply. The driver of the car started the engine, and the car pulled away, following the bus from a safe distance. The enemies were already aware, and the fight was just about to begin. If you're on the edge of your seat, be sure to hit that like button. Subscribing and sharing this video with a friend helps us know you're loving the story and want more. Chapter 7. The letter that changes everything. A week felt like a year. Amara had been living in a foggy state, her mind replaying the lawyer's words over and over again. Every time the phone at the shelter's front desk rang, her heart would jump. She knew it could be the call that changed everything, or the one that told her it was all a mistake. The twins, full of a child's faith, talked about the mansion and the puppy every day, their little stories a constant reminder of the hope she was holding on to. Amara held her breath with every passing hour. One afternoon, as she was helping to sort donated clothes, a woman from the front desk came running over, her face a mix of worry and excitement. Amara Johnson, you have a phone call. He sounds urgent." Amara's heart began to pound so hard it hurt. She walked to the phone, her hands shaking as she picked up the receiver. "Hello, Amara? It's Mr. Davies." The lawyer's voice came through, and it was urgent, just as the woman had said. It was more than urgent, it was almost trembling with disbelief. "Miss Johnson, I found something. You need to come in right away. Now, are you able to get here?" "Yes," Amara whispered, her mind racing. "I can. I'll be there as soon as I can." She hung up the phone and stood there for a moment, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts and fears. The tone of his voice was enough. This wasn't a mistake. This was something big. She rushed to find her friend at the library, explaining she needed to go back to the lawyer's office. Her friend, seeing the look on her face, didn't ask a single question. "Go on," she said gently. "We'll be just fine here. You take care of yourself." The bus ride to the office felt like the longest journey of her life. Every bump in the road, every stop, seemed to stretch the time out. She felt sick with a mix of fear and wild excitement. Was this it? Was this really happening? She kept telling herself not to get her hopes up too high, but her heart refused to listen. When she got to the office, Mr. Davies was waiting for her at the door. He led her directly back to his office, his movements quick and serious. He didn't offer her a seat. He just gestured to his desk, where a single, thick, yellowed envelope sat. It was sealed with a deep red wax, and on the front, written in elegant, old-fashioned handwriting, were the words, "Last Will and Testament of Isabella Johnson." "This is your grandmother's will," he said, his voice hushed. "It's been in our archives for years. No one ever knew where she went. She left this here with a specific instruction that it should only be opened by a direct descendant." I never thought I'd see the day." He gently handed the envelope to Amara. Her hands trembled so much she almost dropped it. The paper felt ancient, a link to a past she never knew existed. She carefully broke the seal and pulled out a few pages. Her eyes scanned the elegant script, her heart pounding. The words seemed to jump off the page. "To my granddaughter, Amara Johnson, an inheritance of $200 million. The numbers seemed to swim on the page. She read it again, and again, and again. 200 million. The numbers were so big they didn't even seem real. They just looked like a foreign language. Amara's mouth went dry. Her breath caught in her throat. She couldn't breathe. She just stood there, her hands shaking, her eyes wide with a mix of shock and disbelief. Is this real? She finally managed to whisper, her voice barely a sound. This can't be my life. Tears welled up in her eyes, blurring the words on the page, blurring the lawyer's face. Felt like she was in a dream. This was a miracle, something she had only prayed for in the darkest corners of her mind. Mr. Davies nodded, his face serious. It's real. It's all here, legally binding. It's been waiting for you, Amara. For years. The family you saw in the paper, they are distant cousins, but your grandmother's will makes it clear you are the only one with a claim to her share. Amara sank into the chair, the letter clutched in her hands. The tears she had been holding back for months, the tears of shame, of hunger, of despair, came pouring out. But this time, they were tears of something else. Tears of relief. Tears of hope. She was no longer a homeless woman. She was a mother who could finally give her children a life they deserved. That night, back at the shelter, she couldn't wait to see her twins. They had eaten the watery soup they were given for dinner and were now playing quietly on their bunk bed. Amara sat next to them and pulled them close, her heart overflowing with love. "Hey, you two," she said softly, her voice still a little choked up. "I have something to tell you. Something incredible." They looked up at her, their little faces serious. She didn't know how to explain the numbers, the documents, the long, complicated history. She just wanted them to understand what it meant. "Remember how we talked about a mansion?" she said, her voice filled with a gentle excitement. "And a puppy?" They nodded, their eyes wide with expectation. "Well, a kind lady left our family something special. It's something that means that we'll never go hungry again." Their little faces lit up. They didn't understand the millions, but they understood never go hungry again. They understood never being cold again. They understood we'll have a home. They cheered, their happy little voices echoing in the noisy shelter. They hugged her tightly, their little arms wrapped around her neck. Amara held them, her face buried in their hair, the last of her old tears turning into new ones of pure, unadulterated joy. But as she lay in the top bunk that night, the excitement began to fade, and the lawyer's final words came back to her. He had been so happy for her, but there was a deep-seated warning in his voice. Be prepared. Families fight harder over money than over blood. They'll come for you. She thought of Derek and the cold, calculated way he had taken everything from her. She thought of the car following her, of the enemies already out there. The knowledge of her inheritance was a shield, but it was also a target on her back. The fight for her children was over. Now a new one was about to begin, and she had to be ready. The news, as they say, travels faster than the speed of light. Word of a possible inheritance linked to the old Johnson family spread like wildfire, carried by hushed whispers and angry phone calls. It wasn't long before the people who had never given Amara the time of day suddenly showed up, dressed in clothes that cost more than she had seen in a year. They were all distant relatives, with names she barely recognized from old family trees. They had never known her, never cared about her or her grandmother, but they all claimed to be the rightful heirs. They appeared at the shelter, a place that was supposed to be a refuge, turning it into a circus. They stood on the sidewalk outside, their expensive cars parked illegally, and shouted to anyone who would listen. They said Amara wasn't even a real Johnson, that she had been adopted, that her grandmother was a disgrace to the family name for leaving them. Some of them tried to be kind, offering her small amounts of money to just go away and forget about the will. A man with a shiny suit and a fake smile tried to hand her an envelope with a few $1,000s, a bribe to sign away her rights. "This is all you'll ever need," he said, looking at her with cold, dismissive eyes. "Take it, and save yourself a lot of trouble." Amara looked at him, at the fancy car, at the small amount of money he thought could buy her silence. She thought about the endless nights she had spent on a hard bunk bed, and the pain of her children's hungry stomachs. She simply turned and walked away, not saying a single word. She knew he couldn't understand, couldn't understand that money wasn't all this was about anymore. This was about justice. This was about proving them all wrong. The gossip inside the shelter was a different kind of monster. Some of the women she had shared a bunk room with, who had seen her at her lowest, now looked at her with envy. They whispered behind her back, "Look at her, pretending she's too good for us now." Others were more cruel, scoffing at the whole story. An inheritance? Please. That homeless woman is making things up. Amara felt more isolated than ever, surrounded by people but completely alone. She had a new hope, but it felt like a fragile thing that everyone was trying to stomp out. But the real storm was yet to come. A few days later, just as she was coming back to the shelter, a sleek black car screeched to a halt in front of her. The door flew open, and out stepped Derek, her ex-husband. He was in his usual sharp suit, but his face was contorted with a fury she had never seen before. Behind him, his new wife Cheryl sat in the car, a smug little smirk on her face. He stormed toward her, his face red with rage. "So this was your plan all along?" he roared, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "To rob me of what's mine? You were playing the poor, pitiful mother while you were sitting on a gold mine." He was accusing her of something she didn't even know about, something that had been hidden from her just as much as it had been from him. The hypocrisy of it all, the sheer nerve of him, made a fire light up inside of her. He had taken everything from her. He had left her with nothing. And now he was accusing her of being a thief? She looked him straight in the eyes, her gaze steady and unafraid. He was trying to be the bully he always was, but something had changed. The shame and exhaustion that had always made her cower were gone, replaced with a fierce and steady strength. "What's yours?" she asked, her voice low and dangerous. Derek laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "That money is part of my family history, my family's legacy. You have no right to it." And that was it. That was the moment Amara's voice, which had been so small and quiet for so long, finally found its power. She took a deep breath, stood up tall, and looked at him, at the man who had torn her life apart, and laughed about it. "You already robbed me of everything, Derek," she said, her voice clear and strong, and it echoed in the busy street. "You robbed me of my home, my family savings, and almost my children. You made me homeless. You made me nothing. You thought I was weak. You thought I could never fight back." She took a step closer to him, her eyes burning with an unshakable resolve. "Not this time. Not this time, you will not win." Derek was so stunned by her courage that he just stood there for a moment, his mouth hanging open. He had never seen this side of her. He looked back at his car, at his new wife, who was watching with wide, angry eyes. He had to save face. He had to be the tough guy he had always pretended to be. He leaned in close, his voice a low, menacing whisper. "If you fight me, I'll destroy you. Remember, I still have custody leverage." The words hit her, cold and hard. Her heart ached with fear, but she didn't back down. He still had the power to keep her away from her children. This wasn't just about money. This was about her family. This was about everything. And she knew, in that moment, she would do whatever it took to win. The courtroom felt different this time. It was the same old room with the same peeling paint and tired-looking fans, but the atmosphere had changed completely. Before, Amara had walked in with her head down, feeling small and invisible. Today, she walked in with her shoulders squared and her head held high. She was no longer a timid, homeless woman. She was a fighter. Beside her walked her lawyer, Mr. Davies, looking serious and ready for a fight. He had told her to dress in the best clothes she had, but she told him it didn't matter. Her clothes told her story, and she wasn't ashamed of it anymore. She was a different person. The long benches were packed again, but this time, the whispers were different. They weren't about pity or judgment. They were about shock and curiosity. People were whispering about the Johnson family, about the hidden will, and about the homeless woman who had come to claim it all. Amara just walked past, her eyes fixed on the front of the room. She felt a new strength in her chest, a quiet resolve that nothing could shake. In the front row, on the other side of the room, sat the opposing relatives. Their faces were pinched with anger and disbelief. They were all dressed in fancy suits and expensive dresses, their expressions a mix of entitlement and greed. There was an older man with a thin mustache, a younger woman with a bored look on her face, and a few others who just looked like they had been cheated out of something that was rightfully theirs. They were the ones who had been watching her from afar. And then there was Derek. He sat with his new wife, Cheryl, in a different section, a little separate from his relatives, his face a mask of cold fury. He watched Amara walk in, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of fear in his eyes. He had expected her to break. He had expected her to give up. But she hadn't. The hearing began, and just as Amara expected, the opposing lawyers went on the attack. They argued that she was a fraud and opportunist. They pointed at her ragged clothes and the weary lines on her face. They argued that she was mentally unstable, homeless, and incapable of handling wealth. One lawyer, a loud man with a booming voice, laughed and gestured toward her, as if she were a joke. "Your Honor, look at this woman," he said with a cruel sneer. "She has no home, no job, and has been living in a shelter. How can we possibly entrust millions of dollars to someone who can't even take care of herself?" The cruel whispers started up again. "She's right," someone said. "She's crazy. Look at her clothes." Amara felt the stings of the insults, but she stood tall. She didn't flinch. She just looked at them all, her heart beating with a steady rhythm of determination. Then Mr. Davies stood up. He walked to the front of the court and placed a few documents on the judge's desk. His voice was calm, clear, and full of authority. He didn't waste time with flowery words. He just spoke the truth. "Your Honor," he said, "the opposition has made many claims about my client's character, but none of that changes the facts of this case. The will of Isabella Johnson is clear and unambiguous. It specifies that the inheritance goes to her direct descendant, her granddaughter, Amara Johnson." He paused and then presented a set of documents. "To address their claim that she is not a real Johnson, I present this." He handed the papers to the judge, who looked at them with a curious expression. "This is a sworn statement from the doctor who delivered her, and a copy of her birth certificate. It proves her mother's maiden name was Johnson. Furthermore," he said, his voice dropping to a serious tone, "to answer any further doubt, here is the result of a DNA test that ties my client directly to a living relative on her grandmother's side of the family. The evidence is irrefutable." A gasp went through the courtroom. The judge looked up, his eyes wide with surprise. The opposing lawyers' faces went pale, and the smug look on the relatives' faces instantly disappeared. They had expected her to be an easy target, someone without a name, without a past. But the truth, backed by legal documents, was a powerful force. For once, Amara was not humiliated. She was vindicated. She had nothing to hide. She was who she said she was, and her past, her suffering, had nothing to do with her right to the money. She saw her children sitting in the back, and they were beaming. Their little faces were full of pride. They had heard the judge, the lawyers, the people whispering. They saw their mother standing strong, not running, not crying. She had fought for them, and she was winning. They looked at her with pure, unadulterated admiration. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. The judge, a man who had seen many cases of family feuds, knew this was a big one. He read the documents carefully, his expression growing more serious with every word. He looked at Amara, then at the furious faces of the opposing relatives, and he knew he couldn't make a final decision right then and there. This wasn't a simple case. It was a battle between old money and a new, unexpected heir. He cleared his throat. "Given the new evidence presented today, and the substantial nature of the estate, I cannot make a final ruling at this time. This case is too large to resolve today." He looked at the room, his eyes scanning every face. "The court will postpone the final ruling for a few weeks to review all of the new information." The news felt like a punch to the gut. The fight wasn't over. Amara felt the hope drain out of her for a moment. But then, she looked at the defeated faces of her relatives and her ex-husband. They had expected to crush her today. They hadn't. They had underestimated her. They had laughed at her, and now they had to wait. She knew the fight wasn't over. But for the first time, she wasn't afraid. She was ready. The legal battle wasn't the only fight Amara was facing. In the days following the court hearing, the pressure from her relatives became even more intense. They knew they couldn't win with legal arguments alone. Not after Mr. Davies had presented the DNA evidence. So they decided to try another way, a much dirtier one. They started with small, anonymous threats, then moved on to phone calls to the shelter, asking for her. Amara had to have the front desk tell them she wasn't there. And even then, the messages they left were filled with veiled threats. But the real challenge came when they showed up in person again. This time, they didn't come to argue or shout. They came to tempt her. Amara was at a small cafe she had started going to with the twins during the day, a place that let them stay as long as they bought a coffee. A man in a very expensive suit, with a cold, smooth face, walked up to her table. He was one of the cousins she had seen in court. He didn't say hello or introduce himself. He just slid a heavy, black suitcase onto the floor beside her chair. The twins looked at it with wide, curious eyes. "We have an offer for you, Amara," he said, his voice as smooth as silk, but with a hard, unyielding edge to it. "We've all agreed. This is a settlement. It's a fair amount. We'll give you this cash, enough for you and your children to live comfortably for the rest of your lives. You can buy a house, a nice car, everything you need." He gave a slight, dismissive laugh. "It's more money than you'll ever be able to earn on your own. All you have to do is take it and sign a paper saying you walk away from the will. No more court battles. No more fights. Just a quiet life." Amara looked from the man to the suitcase, and then back to the man's cold eyes. The temptation was so strong it was almost dizzying. It was a physical thing, a pull in her stomach. All she had to do was say yes, and the fight would be over. The cash inside that suitcase could end all their suffering right now. She could buy a home for her children. She could feed them. She could give them everything they had ever wanted. She could finally have peace. The idea was so simple, so tempting, that it almost felt like the right thing to do. She imagined their little faces, happy and full, never having to worry about where their next meal was coming from. "Think about it," the man said, as if he could read her thoughts. "Why go through all this trouble? Why fight powerful people? You'll just hurt yourself and your children in the end. This is the easy way out, the smart way." He gave her a final, confident look and walked away, leaving the suitcase behind. That night, back at the shelter, Amara sat alone with the twins. They were drawing on paper, a new habit they had picked up at the library. The memory of the suitcase, of all that easy money, still swam in her head. She had to ask them. She had to know what they thought. They were her whole world, the reason she was fighting. She knelt down to their level and looked at their sweet, earnest faces. "Hey, you two," she said softly. "I have a question for you. A big one." They stopped their drawing and looked at her, their eyes serious. "What is it, Mommy?" Leo asked. Amara took a deep breath. Would you be happy if I just took some money for us to live a quiet life? No more fighting. No more court. Just enough for us to live somewhere nice and be happy." She didn't mention the hundreds of millions, just the enough for us to live quietly. She wanted their honest answer, an answer without the big, tempting numbers. She was torn, and she needed a sign, a little bit of guidance from the only people she trusted. Leo thought about it for a moment, his little brow furrowed in concentration. "We'd be happy, Mommy," he said. "But..." Mia, who had been listening to every word, looked at her mother. She put her little hand on Amara's cheek. She shook her head and her voice was so serious, so sure, that it sent a shiver down Amara's spine. "Mommy, you always tell us the truth wins. You always tell us to do what's right. Don't stop now." Her words were a lightning bolt, a small, innocent voice speaking a truth so profound and clear that it cut through all the confusion and temptation. Amara looked at her daughter's face, at her bright eyes, and she knew she was right. She had taught them to be strong, to be good, to believe in what was right. How could she now, at the biggest moment of her life, compromise all of that for the sake of an easier path? The money wasn't just for a house or for food. It was for her dignity. It was for her grandmother's legacy. It was for her children's future, a future built on a foundation of truth and justice, not on a bribe. The next day, she returned the suitcase. She went back to the cafe where the man had left it. She met him outside under the big, bright city lights. The man looked at her with a smug smile, expecting her to sign the papers. But Amara just pushed the suitcase away from her, and it made a soft thud on the pavement. She looked at him with an unyielding look. "You can keep your money," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I'm not for sale." The man's smile dropped. His face went from smug to furious in a second. He looked at the suitcase, then at her, and his eyes were full of a cold rage. "Then you leave us no choice," he spat out, his voice a low hiss. "You want a war? You'll get one. We'll bury you." He picked up the suitcase, slammed it into the trunk of his car, and drove away. Amara stood there, feeling the weight of his words, but also a sense of powerful relief. She had chosen the hard path, the right path. The fight was going to be even more difficult now. But she had her dignity, and she had her truth, and she had her children, who believed in her more than anyone else in the world. The night at the shelter was quieter than usual, but for Amara, that was a bad sign. The silence was heavy, filled with a new kind of fear she hadn't felt before. She had refused the bribe, and now her enemies were showing their true colors. As the shelter's big clock on the wall struck midnight, Amara was still awake, lying on her thin mattress on the top bunk, listening to the soft snores of her children below. She heard a light scratching sound, a noise that was out of place. It was coming from the hallway, just outside the door to their room. She sat up slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. She strained her ears, trying to make out what it was. It wasn't just a mouse or the settling of the old building. It was a definite, deliberate sound. A pause, and then a faint rustle, like paper being pushed under a door. She didn't move. She just lay there, a cold dread creeping up her spine, waiting for the sound to fade. When it was gone, and the silence had returned, she carefully, quietly, climbed down the ladder. She crept to the door and knelt down, her hand on the cold metal. There, on the floor, was a small, folded piece of paper. She picked it up, her hands trembling. She walked to the dim light of the bathroom, away from the sleeping children, and unfolded the paper. Written on it in angry, messy letters were the words, "Give it up or lose everything." Amara's breath hitched. This was no longer just about courtrooms and legal papers. This was real. This was a threat. She knew these people were serious. They wanted to frighten her into giving up what was hers. They didn't just want to win. They wanted to destroy her. She felt the full weight of what she was up against. It wasn't just a legal battle. It was a war, and she was on the front lines with her children. She walked back to their bunk bed and sat on the bottom bunk, her mind reeling. The note felt like a promise of pain and danger. She felt tears of fear well up in her eyes. How could she protect her children from a threat she couldn't even see? How could she fight powerful people who would resort to anything to get what they wanted? She felt a wave of hopelessness wash over her, a feeling she had not experienced since before she met the lawyer. Suddenly, a memory, so clear and vivid it felt like it had just happened, came to her. It was a memory of her grandmother, her face so full of love and worry. Amara was a little girl, holding a flower, and her grandmother was looking at her, her eyes sad and kind. "Amara, my sweet," her grandmother had said softly, stroking her hair. "Remember this. You have a special gift. One day, people will hate you just because of who you are. They will try to take what is yours. But don't you let them. Be strong. Don't ever let them see your fear." At the time, Amara hadn't understood. She thought it was just a strange thing for a loving grandmother to say. But now she understood every word. Her grandmother had known. She had known that her beautiful, simple granddaughter would one day have to face a world full of greed and hate, a world that wanted to take her light away. Now she knew why her grandmother had left the family all those years ago. She had known the darkness that came with their name, and she had tried to run from it. But she couldn't run forever. The shadows from the past were now on her doorstep. Amara felt a sob bubble up in her throat. She felt so alone, so scared. She hadn't expected the fight to get so dark, so personal. The fight for justice, for what was right, felt like a fool's game against people who had no morals. She just wanted her children to be safe. She was so lost in her thoughts that she didn't hear the rustle of the blanket. Two little hands reached out and wrapped around her. Mia and Leo had woken up and crawled into her lap. They didn't say anything. They just held her. Two small, warm bodies. A little island of safety in a storm of fear. They must have seen the tears in her eyes. "Mommy, what's wrong?" Mia whispered, her voice soft with sleep. Amara shook her head, unable to speak. Leo reached up and gently wiped a tear from her cheek with his small thumb. "We're not scared, Mommy," he whispered. "We have you." Their words were a balm to her soul. She looked at their brave, little faces and knew she couldn't give up. They had faith in her. They saw her as a hero. She couldn't let them down. She might be scared, but her love for them was stronger than any fear. She would face any threat, fight any battle as long as she had them. She folded the threatening note and put it deep into her pocket. The fear was still there, but now it was overshadowed by a deep, fierce resolve. Just then, her phone buzzed with an incoming text from Mr. Davies. Amara's heart leaped into her throat as she opened it. The text was short and to the point. "Call me. Urgent." She walked to the shelter's front desk and asked to use the phone. Mr. Davies answered on the first ring, his voice low and serious. "Amara, we found something. Something big," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "My team was digging through old property records. We found proof your grandmother's fortune was hidden. Not just money in a bank, but land, property, and shares. The total value is almost 3 times what we originally thought. The inheritance is bigger than we ever imagined." Amara felt her legs wobble. The numbers didn't matter. What mattered was the new kind of danger. The stakes were higher now. They would do anything to stop her. She looked at her sleeping children, their faces peaceful in the dim light. She thought of the shadows from the past, her grandmother's warnings. She thought of the threats she had chosen to fight. And now, she had to be ready for the biggest battle of her life. The final weeks leading up to the new court date were a whirlwind of activity and emotion. The legal battle had become a public spectacle, and Amara's story, once a quiet tragedy, was now inspiring people far and wide. The news of her inheritance, the custody battle with her ex-husband, and the cruel attempts by her relatives to buy her off had spread through the city and beyond. Amara and the twins began to experience their first taste of real support. Small donations of food and clothing started to arrive at the shelter, sent by strangers who had heard her story. They were small gestures, but they meant the world. The notes that came with them were filled with words of encouragement. "Don't give up. We're rooting for you. And your children deserve the world." The shelter staff, who had once been indifferent or even a little dismissive, now treated her with a newfound respect. They would offer her a kind smile, a quiet word of support. Amara, who had felt so alone for so long, was now surrounded by a growing community of people who believed in her. One afternoon, as she was coming back to the shelter, a woman with a kind face and a notebook approached her. She introduced herself as Naomi, a journalist. "Amara," she said, her voice gentle and sincere. "I've been following your story. So powerful. Your courage. It could inspire millions. Would you consider letting me write a story about you?" Amara hesitated, but then she looked at her children, at their trusting faces, and she knew she had to say yes. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for every mother who had ever been knocked down. But for every step forward, it seemed her enemies took 2 steps back. The threats and bribes had not worked, and now they were using the most painful weapon of all, her children. Her ex-husband, Derek, had watched the public support grow, and he was filled with a new kind of rage. He couldn't stand the thought of her winning, of her being seen as a hero. He and his legal team, backed by her greedy relatives, filed a new, cruel case. They argued that if Amara were to inherit the money, she was not fit to handle it. They claimed that as the children's guardian, he should control their inheritance, and that she should have no say in their lives or their money. It was his last, desperate attempt to take everything from her. The day of the final court hearing was cold and stormy. Rain lashed against the windows of the courthouse, and the wind howled outside. The storm seemed to mirror the chaos and rage inside the courtroom. Amara sat with Mr. Davies, her face calm, but her hands were shaking. She knew this was the day that would decide everything. Her ex-husband and his lawyer presented their case, painting Amara as a reckless, impulsive woman, incapable of being a mother, a danger to her own children's well-being. They used the same tired arguments, but this time they had a new venom to them. They were trying to break her in front of everyone. When it was Amara's turn to speak, she stood up. She felt a tremble run through her body, but she looked straight at Derek. She saw the smug look on his face, the confidence that he would win. And something inside of her, a fire that had been slowly building for months, finally burst into a powerful flame. She wasn't going to let him intimidate her anymore. She wasn't going to let him steal her dignity. "Your Honor," she said, her voice clear and strong, cutting through the chaos of the courtroom. "Derek has made a lot of claims about me. He has tried to take away my home, my name, my dignity. He has tried to make me small and afraid. But the one thing he has not been able to do is take away the love I have for my children." She looked at her ex-husband, her eyes burning with an unshakable resolve. "He may want to control the money, but he will never control my children. You will never use my children as pawns again." The courtroom was silent. No one had ever seen this kind of strength from her before. Even Derek was stunned, his mouth slightly open, the smug look on his face finally gone, replaced by a cold, quiet fury. Amara had spoken her truth, and it had been louder than all of their lies. The storm outside seemed to get louder, the wind howling as if to applaud her courage. The judge, a man who had seen it all, looked from Amara to Derek, and then at the pile of documents on his desk. He knew he was about to make a decision that would change many lives. The tension in the room was so thick you could almost touch it. After what felt like an eternity, he picked up his gavel. "This court has heard all the evidence and arguments," he said, his voice firm and final. "Given the new evidence, and the seriousness of the children's welfare, this court cannot make a final ruling today." He looked at the faces in the room, his voice gaining a dramatic finality. "This case is too important to be decided without a full and complete review. This court will reconvene in 30 days. By then, all evidence of inheritance claims and custody rights must be presented. The court will not accept any more evidence after that time. This is your final chance to prove your case. 30 days. The clock starts now." The judge's words fell on the stunned silence of the room like a thunderclap. 30 days. 30 days to prove everything or lose it all. The fight wasn't over. It was just getting started. But Amara, though shaking from the effort of her speech, felt a powerful sense of purpose. The final battle was coming, and she was ready. She wasn't just a homeless mother anymore. She was a woman who had found her strength, her voice, and her fight. The storm was here, but the dawn was just on the horizon. The 30-day countdown was on, and Amara knew she couldn't waste a single moment. The court had given her one last chance to fight, and she was going to take it. But this time she wasn't fighting alone. She had a new kind of fire in her, a strength that came from a place she had never known existed. She met with Naomi, the journalist, and told her everything, the threats, the bribes, the lies, and the custody battle. She told her the full, painful truth of her story, from her court humiliation to her life in the shelter. The story hit the front page of a popular city paper and went viral online. The headline read, "From Homeless Mother to Heir of Millions? The Unbelievable Story of Amara Johnson." The article was raw and emotional, detailing her struggles, the lies told by her ex-husband, and the cold greed of her relatives. The city was moved. The story stirred up a wave of sympathy and outrage. People from all walks of life, mothers, fathers, young people, old people, were on her side. They saw her not as a greedy woman, but as a symbol of justice, of a mother fighting to protect her children. The support that followed was something Amara had never imagined. A women's rights group, a powerful one with a history of fighting for what was right, reached out to her. They offered their support not with money, but with something far more valuable. They provided legal counsel, a team of lawyers who worked for free because they believed in her. They gave her clothes, not fancy ones, but simple, clean, dignified outfits that made her feel like a person again. And they did something even more incredible. They found a way for her twins, Leo and Mia, to be temporarily enrolled in a school nearby. It was a private school, a good one, and the group had made special arrangements. They wouldn't have to be homeschooled or spend their days in the noisy, crowded shelter. They would be able to be kids, to learn, and to be safe. Amara looked at her reflection in the mirror, wearing a simple, tailored suit they had given her for her next court appearance. It wasn't expensive, but it fit perfectly. It was the first time in a very long time that she had felt like herself. It wasn't about the clothes. It was about what they represented: dignity, strength, and a promise of a new life. It was the first outward symbol of her transformation, a sign that she was no longer the woman who had walked into the courthouse in tattered clothes. But her enemies weren't going to let her win that easily. Her ex-husband, Derek, and his lawyer, seeing her story gaining public support, doubled down on their attack. They started a new wave of lies to the media, calling her a fame-hungry opportunist, and saying she was mentally unstable and manipulating the public with a sob story. Tabloids splashed his lies everywhere, showing photos of him with his new wife, looking like a perfect, caring family, while painting Amara as a deceptive and dangerous woman. The lies hurt, but Amara was prepared this time. She had expected it. She knew they couldn't fight her with the truth, so they would use lies. The public was on her side, and she had a good team of lawyers. She was stronger now. She felt the fire burning in her, a powerful fire of resolve that nothing could put out. One afternoon, as she was picking up the twins from their new school, they were quiet. Too quiet. Mia held her hand, her head bowed low, and Leo looked like he had been crying. Amara felt her heart sink. She knelt down and looked at them, her voice filled with a mother's concern. "What's wrong, my loves?" Mia hesitated, her lip trembling. "Mommy," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Some kids. They were saying things." "What things?" Amara asked, her voice low and gentle. "They called us. They said we were the poor children pretending to be rich," Leo said, tears welling up in his eyes. "They said you're not our real mommy, and you're just trying to get famous and take someone else's money." Amara pulled them into a tight hug, her arms wrapped around them like a shield. She felt the rage burn inside her, a hot, vicious flame. Her children were being hurt because of her fight. She had endured the humiliation and the attacks, but she could not stand to see them suffer. She held them, whispering, "It's not true. It's not true, my loves." She comforted them, but inside, her rage was a silent, powerful scream. She would not let this stand. She would not let them win. She would fight for her children, and she would win no matter the cost. The air in the lavish mansion was thick with the scent of old money and desperation. In a grand study, a group of Amara's distant relatives sat around a polished mahogany table, their faces grim. They had lost in court and had been embarrassed by her story going public. Now, they were done with legal games and public opinion. They had a new plan, a plan based on deceit. An older man with a smug look, one of the main cousins who had tried to bribe her, slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a fake will, a document that had been carefully created to look like it was from Amara's late grandmother, but it named a different heir. A man with a powerful, dangerous look in his eyes, another cousin, picked it up and smiled a cold, humorless smile. They would produce this forged will to the court, hoping to completely discredit Amara and her claim. They knew it was a long shot, but they were running out of time, and they were willing to do anything. Meanwhile, back in his office, Mr. Davies, Amara's lawyer, was working late. A call from an old friend, a detective, had given him a new lead. His friend had told him that the relatives had hired some shady people to help them with their fight against Amara. He had been told they were working on something big, something that would turn the tide of the case. When he got the full story, a deep worry settled in his heart. He called Amara immediately, his voice filled with a serious warning. "Amara," he said, his voice low and cautious, "I've heard from a very reliable source that they're not just fighting you in court anymore. They're getting ready to play dirty. They have money and connections. I don't know what they're planning, but you need to be careful. Proving fraud won't be easy, especially against people with so much power." His words confirmed Amara's growing unease. She had started to notice little things. A black car, a model she didn't recognize, was always parked a little down the street from the shelter. It was there when she left in the mornings, and it was there when she came back in the evenings. She saw shadowy figures on the corners, their faces turned away as she looked at them. They were always there, watching her every move. She felt a cold sense of dread, the feeling of being hunted. The threats, the lies, the constant feeling of being watched, all of it began to weigh on her. One night, after she had tucked the twins in, she sat on the bottom bunk and just broke down. The quiet sobs shook her whole body. She felt so alone, so scared. She was a mother, not a spy or a fighter in a war. She just wanted her children to be safe, to have a normal life. Leo and Mia, who were both awake, crawled down from their bunk and into her arms. They didn't say anything. They just held her, their little arms wrapped tightly around her neck. Amara felt their warmth, their love, and it was the only thing that kept her together. Mia lifted her face to her mother's. "Mommy," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Are they going to hurt us?" Amara looked at her daughter's innocent, worried eyes, and her heart broke all over again. She held them tighter, her hands shaking, her voice thick with emotion. She had to be strong. She had to be a hero for them. "No," she whispered, her voice fierce with a mother's protectiveness. "No, my loves. I won't let them." She held them close, comforting them, but privately, in the deep silence of her mind, she was trembling. She felt like she was in a horror movie, and the bad guys were getting closer. Late that night, after everyone in the shelter was asleep, Amara was jolted awake by a loud bang. She sat up in bed, her body rigid with fear. She heard footsteps, and the door to their room was kicked open with a sickening crack. Two shadowy figures, their faces covered, walked into the room. Amara felt a surge of pure terror. She just lay there, pretending to be asleep, her body stiff with fear. She held her breath as they moved through the room, rummaging through their few belongings. They didn't find anything of value, because there was nothing to find. They were just trying to frighten her. They overturned the beds, scattered the few books and clothes on the floor, and tore down the pictures the children had drawn. It was a cruel, violent act. Just as they were leaving, one of them threw a piece of paper on her bed. A chilling note was left behind. A final, terrible warning: "Quit, or your children pay." Amara lay there, trembling, until she heard their footsteps fade into the distance. She waited for a long time before she dared to move. Her heart was a wild, frantic drum in her chest. She looked at her sleeping children, their faces peaceful and innocent, and a new kind of rage, cold and powerful, filled her. The anger that had been simmering was now a raging fire. They had crossed the line. They had dared to threaten her children. She would never give up. She had nothing to lose but everything to win. The will was locked away in her lawyer's office, safe and sound. But she now knew that the paper was not the real target. The real target was her, and she was going to fight. The 30-day countdown was in full swing, and Amara was doing everything right. She was attending meetings with her new legal team, making sure her children were happy and safe, and for the first time in a very long time, she was hopeful. The love and support from strangers had given her a new kind of energy. The journalist, Naomi, had been her biggest champion, telling her story to the world, and Amara felt like she had a true friend in the ranks. But the world, as she was learning, had a cruel way of reminding her that even when things seemed good, they could turn on you in a second. Amara was at the Women's Center, having a cup of coffee, when she saw a familiar face on a newspaper headline. It was Naomi. But the headline wasn't about Amara's struggle or her fight for justice. It was an article, a long one, written by Naomi herself, and the headline read, "The Johnson Heir. A Homeless Mother's Desperate Fabrications?" Amara's blood ran cold. She picked up the paper, her hands trembling, and began to read. The article was a complete turnaround. Naomi, the woman who had championed her, was now claiming that Amara's story was likely a fabrication. A desperate lie made up by a homeless woman trying to get attention. The article questioned the validity of the DNA evidence, the very document that had stopped the relatives in their tracks. It painted Amara as a con artist, someone who was not only a liar but also a bad mother, using her children for sympathy. It was cruel and filled with lies, all from the woman Amara had trusted. The betrayal was a physical pain, a sharp stab to the gut. Amara felt the ground slipping beneath her feet all over again. The one person she had confided in, the one person who had been telling the truth about her story, had turned on her. It was a vicious blow, and she knew it was a calculated one. She found a quiet corner and called Naomi's number. The phone rang for a long time before Naomi finally answered, her voice tight and defensive. "Naomi," Amara said, her voice shaking. "What is this? How could you write these things? You know my story is true." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, Naomi spoke, her voice flat. "I'm sorry, Amara. I can't talk about it." "No!" Amara cried, the pain in her voice raw. "You owe me an explanation. You told me you believed in me. You told me my story could inspire millions." I can't," Naomi repeated, her voice laced with guilt. They offered me something I couldn't refuse. They said I had a choice. They showed me my bank account, and they said they could either double it or I would lose everything. And I have a family to feed. I'm so sorry." Amara's heart shattered. It wasn't just a simple betrayal. It was the same old story. It was money. It was greed. It was the powerful reaching down to crush the small, the weak. Amara felt the tears she had been holding back for so long streaming down her face. "Why does everyone betray me the moment I start to rise?" she cried into the phone, her voice thick with despair. "Why?" She hung up the phone and just stood there, the paper in her hand, feeling completely defeated. She had fought so hard, but it felt like the whole world was against her. The allies she had gathered were now falling away one by one, bought by the powerful. She felt her hope dying, a small flicker of light in a deep, dark abyss. She walked back to the shelter, her body heavy with a new kind of sadness. That night, she sat on the bottom bunk with the twins. She didn't try to hide her tears this time. She just let them fall. She told them everything, how the lady who wrote about her had turned on them. She told them that the world was a hard place, and that good people sometimes do bad things. Mia, the more outspoken of the twins, looked at her mother, her little face serious and wise beyond her years. She reached out and took her mother's hand. "Mommy," she said, her voice clear and sure, "because they're scared of you. They're scared you'll win. That means you're winning." Her words were a simple, pure truth. They weren't about money or power. They were about fear. They were scared of her. She was a homeless mother, with nothing but love and a fierce will, and she was winning against all their power and money. They were scared. The knowledge filled her with a powerful resolve. She had one last chance, one last fight, and she was going to win. She had to, for her children. Just as she was holding them close, a man from the shelter's front desk walked in. He handed her an envelope. "This just arrived for you," he said, his voice quiet. Amara opened it with a feeling of dread. Inside, it was a subpoena, a final legal order. The courtroom on the day of the final hearing was a scene out of a movie. It was no longer a quiet, dusty room, but a packed, noisy circus. The benches were filled with people. Her relatives, all looking grim and desperate. The media, their cameras flashing like lightning in a storm. and even strangers who had read her story and came to see the ending for themselves. The air crackled with tension and expectation. Amara walked in, holding her twins' hands tightly, a simple, dignified suit on her body, and a fierce, unyielding look in her eyes. She felt the weight of every gaze, but she held her head high. She wasn't just fighting for her family. She was fighting for everyone who had ever been told they couldn't win. Her lawyer, Mr. Davies, walked in beside her, his face a mask of quiet confidence. He had told her that the truth was on their side, and that was all that mattered. The trial began, and the relative's lawyer, a slick man with a cruel smile, went straight for the attack. He presented the forged will, a flimsy piece of paper that he tried to pass off as legitimate. He spoke in a loud, dramatic voice, calling Amara a homeless fraud who was trying to steal wealth that didn't belong to her. He pointed at her, as if she were a criminal, and he pointed at her children, claiming she was brainwashing her children for sympathy. He was trying to tear her down, to break her spirit in front of the whole world. Amara felt the stings of his words, but she didn't flinch. She just sat there, her gaze steady, her heart filled with a calm, quiet strength. After he was done, Mr. Davies stood up. He didn't shout or raise his voice. He just spoke the truth one piece at a time. He started by presenting the DNA results again, the irrefutable proof that tied Amara directly to her grandmother. He then presented historical documents and pictures, old family records that showed the long-lost branch of the family. He brought in witnesses, people who had known Amara's grandmother before she disappeared, who could talk about her kind heart and her love for her family. He was building a wall of truth, piece by piece, that no amount of money or lies could tear down. The relatives looked more and more desperate with every piece of evidence. The smile on the lawyer's face slowly faded. He knew he was losing. The judge, who had been listening to all the arguments with a serious expression, suddenly grew frustrated with the chaos in the room. He slammed his gavel down on the desk with a loud bang that made everyone jump. "This is no circus," he roared, his voice filled with authority. "I will not have this courtroom turned into a show. The future of a family, and 2 children, is at stake here. Evidence, not emotions, will decide this." Just as the judge's words seemed to swing things in Amara's favor, her ex-husband, Derek, stood up. He had been sitting quietly in the back, a silent predator, waiting for his moment to strike. He had one more card to play, one last chance to hurt her. He walked to the front of the room, his face a mask of fake concern. "Your Honor," he declared dramatically, his voice filled with a desperate, chilling urgency. "I demand immediate custody of the twins for their safety. Their mother is being hunted. She's putting them in grave danger. She is a target, and she's endangering them. I ask you to grant me full custody so I can protect them from her reckless fight." His words hung in the air, a final, terrible cliffhanger. He was using her strength, her very fight for her children, against her. He was twisting the threats she had endured into a reason to take her children away for good. Amara's heart stopped. She had been so close to winning, but he had found a way to hurt her one last time. The judge looked at Amara, at her children, at Derek. The final decision was now in his hands. Chapter 17. The mother's cry. The judge's face was grim as he looked at Derek, then at Amara. The request for a temporary custody hearing was a vicious blow, one she hadn't prepared for. Amara felt her knees weaken, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She knew, in that moment, that losing her children would break her completely. Money, dignity, justice, none of it mattered without them. Derek's lawyer pressed on, painting a picture of Amara as an unstable, reckless, and dangerous woman. Someone who was so consumed with her fight that she was putting her children in danger. Amara just sat there, her heart in her throat, unable to defend herself against such a cruel accusation. The judge, seeing the seriousness of the matter, agreed. "Given the claims of danger, I will allow a temporary custody hearing to take place now, within this trial. We need to hear from the children." Amara's blood ran cold. The twins. They were going to have to testify. The courtroom fell silent, holding its breath as Leo and Mia were led to the front of the room. They looked so small, so innocent, their little hands clutching each other for comfort. They weren't scared, though. They looked at Amara, and she gave them a small, encouraging nod. Their eyes, filled with a love so pure, gave her strength. The judge spoke to them, his voice gentle and kind. He asked them where they wanted to live, if they felt safe with their mother, and if they understood what was happening. Leo and Mia looked at each other, and then they looked straight at the judge, their little voices clear and brave. Leo spoke first, his voice trembling a little, but his words were strong and full of truth. "Mommy gives us everything," he said, looking at his mother. "Even when she has nothing. We were hungry, and she gave us her food. We were cold, and she gave us her coat. She always takes care of us." Then, Mia, the more outspoken twin, added her voice, looking straight at Derek and his angry face. "We're not scared when we're with her," she said, her voice full of a quiet power. "We only feel safe with her. She's not scary. You are." Her words were like a thunderclap. A low murmur ran through the courtroom. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Even the strangers, who had only read about them in the papers, were moved to tears. They saw a mother's love, a child's simple, powerful truth. Even the judge, a man who had seen everything, looked shaken. He looked at Amara, then at the twins, and a look of pure emotion crossed his face. He knew the truth when he heard it. The children's testimony was more powerful than any legal argument, more powerful than any lie. After the twins were let out, the judge sat in silence for a long time, looking at all the papers in front of him, the evidence of love and of greed. The courtroom was still, the only sound the soft click of a camera and a sniffle here and there. Finally, the judge looked up, his eyes filled with a new kind of resolve. "I will deliberate," he said, his voice firm. "Both the inheritance and the custody will be decided together. There is a lot of evidence here, both in these documents and in these children's brave words." He looked directly at Amara and then at Derek, and his voice took on a new, serious tone. "Understand this. One wrong move and you lose everything. I will not tolerate any more lies, any more threats. The fate of these children and this inheritance will be decided together. One wrong move, and you lose everything." The judge's words were a heavy weight and terrifying. The fight wasn't over. It was far from it. Amara was so close to winning, but one wrong move, one single mistake, and she would lose it all. She had to be perfect. She had to be strong. She had to fight for her children. The final, terrible battle was just beginning. The final days leading up to the end of the trial were the hardest Amara had ever known. The threats that had once been whispers and notes were now real and terrifying. She felt like a hunted animal, always looking over her shoulder, always on high alert. Her heart hammered in her chest with every strange sound, every unfamiliar car. Her lawyer, Mr. Davies, had told her to be careful, but being careful felt impossible when the whole world seemed to be a threat. One evening, as she was taking the twins on a quick walk to a small grocery store to buy some bread, they were laughing and talking, and for a moment, Amara had let her guard down. She felt a peaceful calm settle over her. As they were crossing the street, she heard the loud screech of tires behind them. She turned just in time to see a car speeding toward them, not slowing down, its headlights bright and blinding. She didn't even think. Her instincts took over. With a mother's fierce strength, she pushed her children out of the way, her hands on their little backs, sending them tumbling onto the grass on the other side of the road. She fell after them, her body hitting the hard ground with a painful thud as the car flew past, just inches away from where they had been standing. Amara lay on the ground, shaken to her core, her body trembling. Her children were safe, but the close call had terrified her. She just held them, her arms wrapped tightly around their little bodies, her face buried in their hair. She didn't say anything, she just held them close, and her tears flowed freely, wetting their hair and her face. The car hadn't stopped. It had just sped away into the night. It wasn't an accident. It was a warning. That night, back at the shelter, after she had made sure her children were asleep, a deep despair settled in. She felt completely broken. She walked to the small corner of their room, knelt on the cold, hard floor, and the sobs she had been holding in came pouring out. She felt like she couldn't breathe, like she couldn't go on. She felt so defeated, so tired of fighting. She didn't know how to protect her children from a world that had become so dangerous. She had done everything right, had fought for what was hers, and what had it brought her? Threats, danger, and constant fear. She looked up at the ceiling, her face wet with tears, and her voice a raw, broken whisper. God, why me? If I'm supposed to have this, why does it feel like a curse? Why is this all so painful? Her tears drenched the floor, silent drops of a mother's pain and despair. She had never felt so alone. But she wasn't alone. As her sobs quieted, she felt two small bodies crawl out from their bunks and kneel beside her. Her twins, Leo and Mia, didn't say a word. They just wrapped their arms around her, one on each side, their little hands clutching her shoulders. They were her everything, her whole world, her reason for living. In that moment, kneeling on the cold floor, in the quiet, dark room of the shelter, they formed an image of pure resilience. A mother and her children against the world. They were her strength. The next morning, Amara walked into her lawyer's office, her eyes tired but her resolve firm. She was done with crying. She was done with being afraid. She was going to fight for her children, no matter what. She was ready to face the final day of the trial. Just as she was about to speak, Mr. Davies, his face a mix of shock and pure triumph, rushed into the room. He was holding a document, his hands trembling with excitement. Amara, he said, his voice a low, urgent whisper. You won't believe this. My team was going through some old legal documents, a long-forgotten case from years ago. It had some clues. We followed a hunch and a trail of breadcrumbs. He paused, his eyes wide. We've uncovered undeniable proof. Your grandmother's real will was hidden. She was a master at hiding things. The entire fortune, all 200 million. It's legally yours. We can prove it in court. They can't fight this. The news, so sudden and so final, seemed to hang in the air between them. The fight was almost over. All the pain, all the tears, all the fear. It had all led to this moment. The courtroom was a pressure cooker. Every seat in the gallery filled, people standing along the walls, trying to catch a glimpse of the final act. Journalists scribbled in their notebooks, their camera crews poised, ready to capture the end of the long-running drama. The air was so thick with tension it was hard to breathe. Amara stood in the middle of it all, a quiet storm in her simple, dignified suit. Her twins were in the gallery, their small faces a mix of anxiety and unshakable belief. Their eyes were fixed on their mother, a silent promise that no matter what happened, they were with her. Across the room, her relatives sat with smug, confident looks on their faces. They were convinced their forged will was foolproof, that it would bury Amara's claims once and for all. Their lawyer looked at Amara with a condescending smirk. Beside them sat her ex-husband, Derek. He was not interested in the inheritance. He just wanted to regain his pride, and he thought that by getting full custody of the children, he would finally put her in her place. He had a look of cold satisfaction on his face, as if he knew he had already won. The judge called the court to order, and the final arguments began. The relative's lawyer took the floor first, his voice loud and theatrical. He presented the forged will, a flimsy piece of paper he tried to pass off as legitimate. He spoke about family honor and tradition, and he called Amara a homeless fraud, someone who was trying to steal wealth that didn't belong to her. He pointed at her with a dramatic gesture, as if she were a criminal, and then he looked at the children, claiming she was brainwashing them for sympathy. Then it was Mr. Davies' turn. He walked to the front of the room, a large, thick file in his hand. He looked straight at the judge, his face calm and serious. He spoke of the threats, the bribes, the staged accident, the attack on Amara and the children. He told the court that they had been fighting not just for money, but for their very lives. He then walked to a table and picked up a large, old, leather-bound book. He held it up for everyone to see. Your Honor, he said, his voice clear and powerful. The opposing counsel has presented what he claims is a legitimate will. A forgery. He placed the book on the table, opened it, and pulled out a document, a beautiful, old, yellowed piece of paper. The air seemed to hold its breath. We have worked for weeks, digging into a forgotten past. We followed a trail of clues from the Johnson family's private archives. We have a document that has been sealed away for years. It is a genuine, authenticated last will and testament, handwritten and notarized by Isabella Johnson herself. The will that the opposing counsel has presented is a complete and utter fraud. Gasps filled the room. The relatives' faces went pale with shock. The smugness was gone, replaced by pure terror. They knew they had been caught. Amara felt a powerful surge of triumph. This was it. This was the moment she had been fighting for. Mr. Davies continued, his voice ringing with authority. He held up the notarized will, the words so clear, so final. This document leaves the entirety of the $200 million estate to one heir only, Amara Johnson. The courtroom erupted. The relatives leaped to their feet, shouting fraud. It's a lie. But Mr. Davies didn't even flinch. He walked back to the table and presented his final two witnesses, a handwriting expert who confirmed the will's authenticity and the notary, a very old man who had been a trusted friend of Amara's grandmother. They both confirmed that the will was indeed real and that the forged one was fake. The proof was irrefutable. The judge slammed his gavel, bringing the room to silence. The relatives sat back down, defeated, their faces a mixture of fury and despair. They had lost. But the case wasn't over. Amara's custody hearing still had to be decided. The judge looked at the lawyers, then at Amara, then at the twins. The tension was suffocating. He knew that the two cases were intertwined. He had to decide not just about money, but about the future of a family. He rose from his seat, his face grave and thoughtful. The court has received all evidence, he said, his voice echoing in the silent room. The court will recess for 2 hours before I render my verdict. My decision on both the inheritance and the custody will be decided together. There will be no more delays. The fate of this family will be decided today. The tension was unbearable. The 2-hour recess was a terrifying eternity. The courthouse, once a place of law and order, had become a den of chaos. Journalists and onlookers spilled into the hallways, their voices a deafening roar. Amara was trying to find a quiet corner with her children when a face she knew approached her, his smile a thin, cruel line. It was one of the greedy relatives. His eyes filled with a cold, pure hatred. You may have one in there, he spat, his voice low and full of venom. But this isn't over. You may win the case, but you won't live to enjoy it. He didn't say another word. He just gave her a long, hard look and walked away, leaving Amara's heart pounding in her chest. A few moments later, as she was trying to get to a different hallway with the twins, a group of men suddenly appeared from a side door, their faces hard and menacing. They moved quickly, their movements a practiced, chilling dance. They cornered her and her children against a wall, their bodies a human barricade. Amara's breath hitched. She instinctively pulled her children behind her, shielding them with her body, her heart a frantic drum in her chest. You should have taken the money, lady. One of the thugs sneered, his voice filled with a quiet threat. Now you'll lose it all. The easy way or the hard way. It's up to you. Amara looked at him, her body rigid with a fear so intense it was almost a physical pain. She just stared at him, unable to speak. The twins clung to her legs, their little bodies trembling. The air felt thick, suffocating. She looked around, desperate for a way out. Then, just as the thugs were about to close in, a loud, clear voice cut through the chaos of the hallway. Hey, what's going on here? A woman from the advocacy group, one of the first people who had helped Amara, was standing there with a group of other women. They didn't have weapons. They just had strength in numbers. They moved forward, a living wall of protective fury, surrounding Amara and her children. The thugs looked surprised, then angry, but they didn't want a public fight. Not with cameras everywhere. They looked around, saw the journalists, their cameras flashing like lightning in a storm, and they backed away, melting into the crowd. Amara was safe. Amara just stood there, her body trembling with a mixture of fear and relief. For the first time, she realized she was not alone. The support she had been receiving from strangers wasn't just words on a note or a few dollars. It was real. She had a whole community of women standing behind her, a wall of strength that she had never known she had. She was no longer just a mother fighting for her children. She was the voice of countless women who had been silenced, who had been pushed down. The knowledge filled her with a powerful, unshakable strength. As the 2-hour recess came to an end, Amara was finally able to walk back into the courtroom, her head held high, her children by her side. As they passed Derek, he looked at her with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. He leaned in close and whispered, his voice a low, chilling hiss. "Even if you win, I'll drag you down with me." His eyes were cold, dangerous, and for the first time Amara was not afraid. She had faced his worst and she had survived. She was ready. The courtroom, once a scene of chaos and tension, was now completely silent. All eyes were on the judge as he returned to his seat, his face unreadable. Amara's heart hammered in her chest, a frantic drum in the suffocating quiet. She looked at her children, their small hands in hers, their faces pale but full of a quiet hope. They were her reason, her strength, her whole world. The entire room leaned forward, every single person holding their breath, waiting for the final word. The judge looked at the room, his gaze sweeping over the crowd, taking in the anxious faces of the relatives, the fury on Derek's face, and the unwavering resolve on Amara's. He picked up a thick file and his voice, when he finally spoke, was calm and clear. "The court has reviewed all the evidence in the case of the estate of Amara Johnson," he began, his voice echoing in the silent room. "The forged will presented by the opposing counsel has been determined to be a fake, created for the sole purpose of fraud. The documents and testimony presented by the plaintiff's counsel, including the DNA evidence and the notarized will, are irrefutable." He paused, his gaze fixed on Amara. "The estate of $200 million legally belongs solely to Amara Johnson." The courtroom erupted. Gasps of shock, cheers of relief, and shouts of pure outrage all mixed together in a deafening roar. The relatives collapsed in their seats, their faces a mixture of fury and shock, their greedy plan completely ruined. Amara just stood there, stunned. Tears began to stream down her face, tears of relief and exhaustion. She had won. It was over. But it wasn't. The judge slammed his gavel down, bringing the room back to a tense quiet. He was not done yet. He then turned his attention to the second half of the case, the one that truly mattered. "The court has also reviewed the matter of the children's custody," he said, his voice now gentle but firm. "I have heard the testimony of the children, and it is my belief that their words, spoken from the heart, are more powerful than any legal argument." He looked at Derek, his voice now laced with a steely finality. "The twins have spoken clearly. Their loyalty is unquestionable. Custody of the children remains with their mother, Amara Johnson." Derek slammed his fist on the table, a sound of pure, unadulterated defeat. He had lost. He had lost everything, his pride, his money, his control over her and his children. He just sat there, his face a mask of bitter rage. Amara sank to her knees, her body trembling with a powerful wave of emotion. Her children, seeing her, ran to her, their little arms wrapping around her neck. The courtroom, which had been so cold and judgmental, was now filled with a wave of applause. Strangers cheered, their voices full of a powerful, genuine joy. The journalists, their cameras flashing, captured the moment of a mother and her children, their tears of joy falling freely. Amara didn't care about the cameras or the noise. She just held her children close, her heart overflowing with a love so pure, so powerful, that it felt like it could heal every wound. The journalist who had betrayed her, watching from the back, had tears in her own eyes. She had chosen greed over truth, and now she saw what she had lost. As Amara, with her children by her side, finally exited the courthouse, the cameras flashed, and reporters yelled questions, their voices a deafening roar. They wanted to know about the money, about her plans, about the future. But Amara, trembling with a powerful emotion, held up her hand, and the crowd went silent. "I have nothing to say about the money," she said, her voice clear and strong. "And I have nothing to say about the lies. My children and I have been through a lot. But I want every woman to know this." She looked straight into the cameras, her eyes filled with a new kind of fire. "I'm not just fighting for me. I'm fighting for every woman who's been told she's nothing. For every mother who has been knocked down. We are not defined by our past. We are defined by our fight. And we can win." The taste of victory was sweet, but it also felt completely unreal. After the verdict, the world became a blur of celebration and chaos. Mr. Davies helped her navigate the immediate next steps, from dealing with the legal filings to securing temporary protection for her and the children. It was all a lot to take in, but Amara's mind was focused on one thing: getting her children to their new home. The journey to the estate felt like a dream. They rode in a simple, hired car, and as they drove through a lush, green countryside, the world began to change. The city and its noise, the shelter and its cold reality. It all faded away. They pulled up to a magnificent gate, old and covered in vines, and the car drove up a winding driveway. And then there it was, Isabella Johnson's estate. The mansion was old, but it was beautiful. The outside was made of dark, weathered stone, and the windows were tall and majestic. The grounds were vast, with a big, wild garden and old trees. It wasn't a modern, cold house like the ones in the city. It had a kind of gentle, knowing look, as if it had been waiting for them. Amara took a deep breath as they walked inside, the grand wooden doors opening to a big, beautiful entrance hall. The air inside smelled of old books and dried flowers, a warm, welcoming scent. The twins, Leo and Mia, didn't hesitate. They let go of her hands and ran into the wide, open spaces. Their laughter echoed through the grand corridors, a sound so full of pure, unadulterated joy that it filled Amara's heart. The sound was a stark contrast to the silence they had been forced into at the shelter, a place where even a loud laugh could get them in trouble. Here, their laughter was free, a song of their newfound freedom. They were finally home. Amara walked through the halls, her hand trailing along the dusty banister, her heart so full it ached. She found her way to a quiet room, a study filled with old books and a big fireplace. On the mantel, she saw a portrait, a painting of a beautiful, kind-faced woman. It was her grandmother, Isabella. She looked just as Amara remembered her, her eyes filled with a gentle wisdom. Amara walked toward the portrait, and the tears she had been holding back for the past few hours finally came pouring out. She stood there, sobbing, her hand reaching out to touch the painting. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Thank you for believing in me even when I didn't believe in myself. You were right all along. You were right about everything." She remembered her grandmother's quiet strength, the warnings she had given her, the promises she had made. All of it had been true. All of it had been for this moment. She looked around the room, at the home her grandmother had built, and she felt a powerful sense of peace. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the broken necklace, the one Derek had given her, the one that had fallen apart in her hand. It had been a symbol of her shattered life, of the promise that had been broken. She walked to a small desk, and with a careful hand, she laid the broken pieces of the necklace down. Then, she took out a small, simple box and found a piece of strong gold wire. With a steady hand, she began to repair it, twisting the broken pieces back together. She worked quietly, the only sound the soft click of metal. She put the newly repaired necklace beside her grandmother's portrait, a sign that her shattered life was now whole again. The necklace was no longer a symbol of betrayal. It was a sign of her strength, her resilience, and her new beginning. As night fell, and the mansion was lit by the soft glow of a few lamps, Amara finally felt a sense of peace. But she knew her fight wasn't over. She had a new home, a new life, but the world was still watching. As she was getting ready for bed, the mansion's phone rang. It was Mr. Davies. "Amara," he said, his voice full of a new kind of warning. "The media isn't going away. They're hounding everyone. A major television network just called me. They want an exclusive on-camera interview. The whole world wants to hear your story. They want to know everything. The day of the televised interview arrived, and Amara felt a quiet sense of calm settle over her. She sat in her grandmother's grand old study, the very room where she had first found the clues to her inheritance. The room was filled with books and memories, a place of peace and knowledge. She wore a simple, graceful dress, elegant but not extravagant, a perfect reflection of the woman she had become. Her twins sat on the floor beside her, drawing and coloring, their faces filled with a quiet pride. They were not just her children. They were her anchors, the reason for her every fight. The lights and cameras were set up in the study, and the famous television host, a kind-faced woman with a gentle voice, sat across from her. This wasn't just an interview. It was a chance to speak to the world, a chance to share her story and her truth. Amara took a deep breath, and the cameras went live. The host began by talking about Amara's past, the humiliation, the court battles, the homelessness. She showed pictures of the old, crowded shelter, and she showed the front pages of the newspapers that had once called Amara a fraud. The contrast was stark and powerful. Amara, looking directly into the camera, spoke with a clear, steady voice. There was no more fear, no more shame, just the truth. "I lost everything," she said, her voice filled with a powerful, emotional depth. "I lost my home, my family savings, and almost my children. I was mocked and shamed, and I felt like I was worth nothing. But I found strength I never knew I had. I found a fire inside of me, a fire that was so powerful it burned away all the fear. And to every woman watching, your story can change overnight." The interview went on for an hour, but it felt like a lifetime. Amara talked about the friends she had made, the kindness of strangers, and the love of her children. She didn't talk about the money. She talked about the journey. She talked about the strength that comes from within, the love that can build a home anywhere, and the power of a mother's will. The impact was immediate. The network's switchboards were flooded with messages from women across the world, thanking her for inspiring them. They told her that her story had given them hope, that it had given them the courage to fight for themselves. The women's rights advocacy group that had helped her reached out and named her an honorary ambassador for women's rights. She was no longer just Amara Johnson, a woman who had won the lottery. She was a symbol of strength and resilience. In a small apartment, far away from the cameras and the lights, her ex-husband, Derek, watched the interview. He was a broken man. He had lost his money, his new wife, and his power. He was a bitter and broken man, a hollow shell of his former self. His lies had been exposed to the world, and he had nothing left. The relatives who had betrayed her had also vanished into obscurity, their greed having led to their own ruin. They were fighting amongst themselves, bitter and angry, their ambitious plan a complete and utter failure. As the interview was nearing its end, the host looked at Amara, her face filled with respect and admiration. "Now that you have 200 million, she asked, her voice soft and curious. "What's next for Amara Johnson?" Amara smiled softly, a knowing look in her eyes. She didn't answer. She just smiled, a smile that was full of 1,000 secrets, leaving the audience in suspense, leaving them to wonder about the future of the woman who had gone from having nothing to having everything. The sun rose, painting the sky with soft, golden hues. For so long, the days had started in the harsh, gray light of the city shelter. But today, Amara stood on the balcony of her grandmother's grand estate, a warm mug in her hands, watching the dawn break over the city below. The air was cool and fresh, and for the first time in forever, there was no fear, no anxiety, no shame. The storm that had raged throughout her journey, both literally and figuratively, was gone. The morning was calm and peaceful, a true new day. She had told the television network she didn't know what was next, but in the quiet of this new morning, she knew. She had found herself, her strength, and her purpose, and she knew exactly what she had to do. She felt two small, warm bodies press against her legs. Leo and Mia were standing beside her, holding their own mugs of hot cocoa, their little faces lit by the golden light of the sun. They didn't say anything. They just stood with her, looking out at the world, at their new world. Amara knelt down to their level and pulled them into a tight hug. She looked from one to the other, her eyes filled with a powerful, endless love. "Look at us," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "We've been through fire, but we came out gold. We are stronger now. We are better now. Never forget where we came from, and never stop believing in the truth. Never stop believing in yourselves." They hugged her back, their little arms wrapped tightly around her neck. They didn't understand the full weight of her words, but they understood the love, the promise, the hope. They knew they were home, and they knew they were safe. The sun climbed higher in the sky, casting a warm, gentle light over the grand estate, a fortress of love and safety that her grandmother had built. The thought, a promise, came to her. She wasn't going to just use her wealth for herself. She had a new purpose, a new mission. She would create a foundation, a place of refuge for homeless women and children. She would build shelters and programs, and she would use her wealth to ensure that no mother would ever have to feel the shame and despair that she had felt. No child would ever have to go to bed hungry. She had been through the fire, and she would use the gold she had found to help others. The camera of the story pulled back, showing the grand estate in its entirety. The city in the distance, a place where her old life had been so painful. It showed Amara standing tall, her children by her side, a woman transformed from humiliation to triumph. She was no longer just a mother. She was a symbol of strength, of courage, of a fight for what was right. She was once embarrassed in court as a homeless mother. Now, she stood as a symbol of strength, carrying not just 200 million in inheritance, but the priceless wealth of dignity restored. If the story touched you, drop a comment below and tell me what part moved you the most. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that hope can rise even from the darkest places.